I'm a 27-year-old guy with a decent paying job. I wouldn't say I'm rich, but I'm comfortable. At least I would be if my family didn't treat me like their personal ATM. Growing up, it was always drilled into me to take care of family. That's fine, I guess, but somewhere along the way, helping out turned into me funding practically everything. My mom and two siblings, both in their mid-20s and unemployed, have come to expect me to pick up the tab for just about everything. It's frustrating, but every time I push back, I'm hit with guilt trips about all the sacrifices mom made for us growing up. Christmas is the worst. My family has this big tradition where we go all out, decorations, a huge dinner, and of course tons of gifts. It's nice in theory, but somehow I always end up paying for most of it. My mom, in particular, has expensive taste. She's obsessed with luxury items, especially designer purses. The problem? She can't afford them, but that doesn't stop her from wanting them. This year, everything started unraveling in late November. We were sitting around after dinner, and mom casually mentioned a specific designer purse she had her eye on. She described it in detail, brand, color, size, before dropping the bombshell price, over $2,000. My siblings immediately chimed in, hyping it up and saying how much she deserved it. At first, I laughed. Surely this was a joke. I mean, $2,000 for a purse? When I'm already juggling holiday expenses. But mom wasn't laughing. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You'll figure it out. You always do." I tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but the awkwardness lingered. Here's the thing, I'd already spent a good chunk of money on Christmas. I had thoughtful gifts planned for everyone, including my mom. Her gift wasn't designer level expensive, but it was meaningful and something I knew she'd like. Still, I brushed off her comment, thinking she was just caught up in the moment. Work has been extra hectic lately, with me pulling longer hours to cover holiday costs. Between that and the usual year-end stress, I've barely had time to breathe. Then, about a week after the purse incident, a message popped up in the family group chat. Mom wrote, "It's disappointing when your own kids don't appreciate you. I guess I shouldn't expect much." It didn't take a genius to figure out what she was hinting at. My siblings jumped in right away, egging me on. They kept saying things like, "Just get her the purse. It's not a big deal. You can afford it." It was like they were on some team I hadn't signed up for. Meanwhile, my dad stayed completely neutral, as usual. His only contribution was, "I'm staying out of this." Classic dad move. At that point, I decided to clear the air. I called mom directly and explained I couldn't afford the purse. I reminded her about the gift I'd already bought and how much effort I'd put into planning Christmas. Her response? She acted like I'd just told her I was skipping Christmas altogether. She went on about how much she sacrificed for me over the years and how ungrateful I was being. Then came the ultimatum. If I don't get that purse, there's no point in celebrating Christmas this year. I was stunned. She wasn't just upset, she was genuinely saying she'd cancel Christmas if I didn't cave. I hung up, feeling like the walls were closing in. The next few days were tense. The group chat was eerily quiet, except for a few passive-aggressive comments from my siblings. They'd text things like, "Some people really need to learn the meaning of family," clearly directed at me. Meanwhile, mom wasn't answering my calls or texts. I felt torn. On one hand, I didn't want to ruin Christmas for everyone. On the other hand, this whole situation was absurd. I mean, who cancels Christmas over a purse? Still, I found myself second-guessing everything. Was I being selfish? Was it really such a big deal to buy her the purse if it meant keeping the peace? As all of this was swirling in my head, I decided to do something I've never done before, turn to Reddit. I needed an outside perspective. Was this normal? Were other families like this? Or was my mom being unreasonable? I laid it all out, the family dynamics, the Christmas tradition, the purse, everything, and hit post. The responses came pouring in. At first, I was overwhelmed. Strangers from all over were telling me what they thought, sharing their own stories, and giving advice. It was like stepping into an entirely different world, one where people weren't afraid to call out toxic behavior, even from family. Some of the comments hit hard, but they gave me a lot to think about. By the time I logged off, I wasn't any closer to a decision. Christmas was fast approaching, and the pressure was mounting. Part of me wanted to stick to my guns, but another part just wanted the drama to end. Either way, one thing was clear, this Christmas wasn't going to be like any other. Update 1. The fallout started a few days after my Reddit post. Mom sent a long message in the family group chat announcing that Christmas was officially canceled. According to her, there was no point in celebrating because no one cared about her happiness. It was dramatic, even for her. The group chat exploded. My siblings wasted no time piling on, calling me selfish and accusing me of ruining the family tradition. They painted me as the bad guy, completely ignoring how much I've already done to make the holidays happen every year. Mom wasn't done. She followed up by saying she'd be returning all the gifts she bought for everyone, claiming there was no point in giving gifts when the spirit of Christmas is gone. It was clearly meant to escalate the situation, and it worked. My siblings took her side again, saying she was completely justified and that I should fix things before it was too late. Their version of fixing things, of course, was me buying the $2,000 purse. Later that evening, I got a private text from Dad. He admitted he thought Mom was overreacting, but in the same breath, he encouraged me to just get the purse to keep the peace. That was classic Dad, avoiding conflict at all costs. I didn't respond right away. What could I even say? Meanwhile, the Reddit post was still gaining traction. The comments were pouring in, with people urging me to stand my ground. A lot of them shared their own experiences with entitled family members, and some of the stories made mine seem tame in comparison. I updated the post to include the latest drama, and the support I got was overwhelming. Still, a part of me couldn't help but wonder if I was being too harsh. I shared the situation with one of my close friends. After hearing the whole story, they were blunt. Your mom is manipulating you. If you give in now, it'll never stop. They encouraged me to set firm boundaries, no matter how uncomfortable it felt. It wasn't the first time I'd heard advice like that, but hearing it from someone who knows me made it hit differently. At work, I vented to a coworker while we were grabbing coffee. They joked that I should cancel mom instead, which made me laugh for the first time in days. It was a lighthearted comment, but it reminded me that the whole situation was ridiculous. The drama wasn't confined to our family group chat. Mom took it to Facebook, posting a vague status about selfish children who don't appreciate everything their parents do for them. She didn't name names, but it didn't take a detective to figure out she was talking about me. The post got a mix of supportive comments from her friends and a few thinly veiled jabs at me from extended family members. My aunt, mom's sister, messaged me privately to ask what was going on. When I explained, she was surprisingly supportive. She admitted she'd seen mom's Facebook post and thought it was over the top. She even offered to host Christmas at her house if things completely fell apart. Knowing I had her on my side gave me a bit of relief. Still, doubt started creeping in. Was I really being too harsh? Maybe I could find a cheaper designer purse and call it a compromise. It wouldn't be the one she wanted, but it might smooth things over. The idea lingered in my head until I overheard something that snapped me out of it. A cousin mentioned that one of my siblings had a plan to guilt trip me into giving them money for rent as some sort of punishment for not buying the purse. It was petty and vindictive, and it reminded me exactly why I needed to set boundaries. I wasn't just dealing with unreasonable demands from mom, it was a whole system of entitlement that I'd been enabling for years. I remembered advice I'd gotten from a therapist a while back. You can love your family and still say no. That stuck with me. It wasn't about being harsh or cruel, it was about not letting myself get walked over. Mom stopped answering my texts after that. The silent treatment wasn't new, but it still stung. I tried reaching out a couple of times, mostly to keep communication open, but she ignored me. I suggested a secret Santa system for next year to avoid this kind of conflict, but my siblings shot it down immediately. They made it clear they liked the current system, where I foot most of the bill. After a lot of back and forth in my head, I made my decision. I wasn't going to budge. I wouldn't buy the purse, even if it meant Christmas was ruined. It felt like the only way to break the cycle. If mom and my siblings wanted to be upset, that was on them. I'd done everything I could to make the holidays special, and I wasn't about to let their unreasonable demands push me into a corner. As Christmas drew closer, the tension in the family grew. The group chat stayed quiet, aside from the occasional passive-aggressive jab. I wasn't sure how it would all play out, but one thing was clear. This Christmas was going to be unlike any other we'd had before. Update 2. The escalation started with a group call Mom organized, complete with her dramatic flair. She opened the call by declaring that I had ruined Christmas and went on about how ungrateful children had drained her joy. My siblings chimed in, backing her up as if they'd rehearsed it. They hinted that they might not even show up for Christmas dinner unless I fixed things by buying the purse. The guilt tripping was relentless, but I stayed quiet and let them run out of steam. Later that night, Dad called me privately. He admitted he thought the whole situation was ridiculous, but in typical dad fashion, he said it wasn't worth the fight. He suggested I just get the purse to make everything go back to normal. Hearing that from him wasn't surprising, but it didn't make it any easier to stomach. It felt like everyone was telling me to cave for the sake of peace. The next day, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled across something that stopped me in my tracks. Mom had posted photos from a recent spa day, complete with champagne, a luxury robe, and a hashtag about self-care. It didn't take long to piece together that she'd splurged on this trip while demanding I buy her a $2,000 purse. It wasn't about money, it was about control. Around the same time, my aunt stepped in with her backup plan. She texted me to say that if Mom followed through with canceling Christmas, she'd host it at her place instead. It was a relief to know I had somewhere to go if things fell apart completely. Then came a curveball. I received a year-end bonus at work. It wasn't massive, but it was enough to cover the purse if I wanted to. The timing was almost too convenient. For a moment, I considered buying the purse just to end the drama, but before I could even think it through, one of my siblings showed up at my apartment uninvited. They acted like they were just dropping by, but it didn't take long for their real agenda to surface. They launched into a guilt trip about how I was ruining everything and how easy it would be for me to make things right. I shut that conversation down as quickly as I could. The petty moves didn't stop there. A couple of days later, I found out from a friend of the family that Mom had uninvited me from her annual cookie baking event. It was one of her favorite holiday traditions, and she made a big show of hosting it every year. This time, she made sure everyone knew I wasn't welcome. It was just another way to drive the wedge deeper. At my next therapy session, I laid everything out: the calls, the texts, the uninviting, and even the spa day revelation. My therapist reminded me that I wasn't responsible for fixing everyone else's emotions, and that my happiness mattered too. It was good advice, but easier said than done. Things took another turn when a cousin reached out to me privately. They told me that Mom had been talking behind my back to extended family, painting me as selfish and greedy. According to them, she'd spun the story to make it sound like I was refusing to contribute anything to Christmas, conveniently leaving out all the details about the gifts I'd already bought or how much I'd spent on previous holidays. It stung, but it also solidified my resolve. Back on Reddit, I shared the latest updates. The response was overwhelming. People flooded the comments with their own stories about manipulative parents, offering advice and support. Some even messaged me directly to say how much my story resonated with them. It was a strange feeling, comforting, but also sobering to realize how common this kind of behavior was. Mom, meanwhile, kept up her social media antics. She posted a passive-aggressive meme about ungrateful children and how some people only call their parents when they want something. It was so pointed that I couldn't help but screenshot it and share it on Reddit. People in the comments called her out for what it was, a desperate attempt to gain sympathy. With everything that had happened, I decided to set a firm boundary. I texted Mom and told her that, unless she respected my decision, I wouldn't be attending Christmas this year. No purse, no compromises. I also made a plan to redistribute the gifts I'd already bought. Instead of letting them go to waste, I decided to donate them to a local charity. I shared the idea in the family group chat, which predictably set off another wave of outrage. The next day, Mom sent me a voice note. In it, she was sobbing, accusing me of breaking her heart and asking how I could do this to her. It was dramatic and emotionally charged, but it didn't change anything for me. I wasn't backing down. As Christmas crept closer, the tension in the family reached an all-time high. I didn't know how it would all end, but one thing was clear: this was no longer just about a purse. It was about breaking free from a toxic cycle that had gone on for far too long. Update 3. The family implosion started when my aunt stepped in to officially take charge. She sent out a group message, inviting everyone to her house for Christmas and promising a stress-free holiday. It was clear she was drawing a line in the sand. The invitation split the family into two camps: those on Aunt's side, me and a few extended family members, and those rallying behind Mom, my siblings, and a handful of her closer relatives. The divide deepened when one of my siblings called me. They were livid, accusing me of ruining everything and making Christmas impossible for everyone. They even went as far as to say they wouldn't show up anywhere for Christmas unless I made it right. I stood my ground, refusing to give in, and the conversation ended with more tension than it started. Not long after, Mom took her dramatics to the next level. She posted a picture of herself in bed on Facebook, claiming to be too sick with heartbreak to celebrate Christmas. The caption hinted at betrayal and ungrateful children, and her friends chimed in with supportive comments. It was over the top, even for her. What shocked me most was Dad finally cracking. During a phone call with him, I overheard him telling Mom to stop acting like a child and that she was making things worse. It was the first time I'd ever heard him stand up to her. Still, even in that moment, he told me I could end the whole mess by just buying the purse. He was walking a tightrope, as always. The situation escalated further when my siblings started airing dirty laundry on social media. They posted cryptic tweets and Instagram stories about toxic family members and fake nice people, making it painfully obvious they were talking about me. Their friends joined in, tagging me indirectly and fueling the fire. The turning point came when my aunt shared Mom's Christmas canceled announcement with the extended family. Some relatives messaged me privately, saying they found Mom's behavior embarrassing. A cousin even leaked screenshots of a private chat where Mom had been bad-mouthing me. She'd left out key details, of course, like how much I'd already done for Christmas or the thoughtful gift I'd planned for her. Then came the anonymous messages. Someone, maybe a relative, maybe one of Mom's friends, sent me a series of DMs accusing me of being heartless and greedy. They claimed I was abandoning my family over something as small as a purse. It was exhausting, but I didn't engage. Meanwhile, my coworkers, who I'd been venting to throughout the ordeal, decided to lift my spirits. They organized a small holiday gathering at work, complete with snacks and a gift exchange. It wasn't fancy, but it was genuine, and their kindness felt like a breath of fresh air compared to the chaos at home. At my next therapy session, my therapist hit me with a question that stuck. If this wasn't your mom, would you tolerate this behavior from anyone else? That question lingered in my mind and helped me see things more clearly. It wasn't about the purse anymore, it was about the patterns I'd let go unchecked for years. One night, Mom called me out of the blue. It was past midnight, and she was sobbing. She said she was sorry, but the apology quickly shifted into a justification. She just wanted to feel special for once. When I asked if she understood why her demand was unfair, she dodged the question and shifted the blame back to me. It was a circular conversation that went nowhere. Adding fuel to the fire, one of my siblings accused me of trying to replace Mom with Aunt by agreeing to go to her house for Christmas. It was such a ridiculous accusation that I didn't even know how to respond. They were grasping at straws now, desperate to make me the villain. As the dust settled, something unexpected happened. Extended family members and even a few of Mom's friends started siding with me. The more people saw how far she was willing to go, the more they began to question her behavior. A younger cousin even messaged me privately to say they'd always looked up to me and thought I was doing the right thing. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. I decided to follow through with my re-gifting plan. I announced in the group chat that the gifts I'd originally bought for Mom and my siblings were being donated to a local charity. The message sent shockwaves through the chat. Mom exploded, accusing me of hating her and ruining the family. My siblings backed her up, but this time Dad surprised everyone by stepping in. He told them all to stop acting childish and that enough was enough. As Christmas approached, it was clear the family wasn't going to be the same after this. The drama wasn't over, but the power dynamics were shifting, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was starting to take control of my own life. Update 4. Christmas morning started quietly. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing around trying to make last-minute arrangements or stressing over whether everything was perfect. Instead, I headed to my aunt's house, where a small group of family members had gathered. The atmosphere was calm and cheerful, a stark contrast to the chaos I was used to. My aunt had kept her promise of a drama-free holiday, and it was refreshing. The smell of cinnamon rolls filled the air, and Christmas music played softly in the background. For once, it felt like what the holidays were supposed to be. True to their threats, my siblings didn't show up. They stayed with mom instead, making sure to post plenty of pictures on social media. Their posts showed them lounging on the couch, surrounded by a modest spread of food. The captions were clearly aimed at me, with lines like "Real family sticks together" and "Cozy Christmas with those who matter most." It didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. It just confirmed how far they were willing to go to keep the narrative alive. Mom, despite all her earlier dramatics, ended up hosting a small gathering. The photos she posted were filled with forced smiles and captions like "Real love isn't about gifts." It was ironic, considering how the whole conflict started. From what I heard later, the gathering wasn't much of a celebration. Without the usual extravagance, the mood felt more like a regular Sunday dinner than Christmas. While all of this was happening, I decided to share my side of the story online. I posted pictures of the gifts I'd donated and wrote a heartfelt message about choosing kindness and breaking toxic cycles. The response was overwhelming. People commented, shared their own experiences, and thanked me for standing up for myself. It felt good to know I wasn't alone. Later in the day, Dad called me privately. He sounded tired, almost defeated. He admitted that he regretted not standing up to Mom earlier in their marriage and praised me for doing what he couldn't. Still, he wasn't ready to fully confront her and urged me to be patient. It was a bittersweet conversation, but I appreciated his honesty. By mid-afternoon, one of my siblings called me. They wasted no time accusing me of dividing the family and ruining Christmas for everyone. They demanded I apologize to Mom and fix things before it was too late. I kept calm and told them I wasn't changing my mind. The call ended with more tension, but I was done being dragged into their guilt games. Not long after, Mom sent me a long, emotional text. She went on about how hard it was to raise me, how much she'd sacrificed, and how I was turning my back on her. She ended with, "But you can't even do one nice thing for me." It was the same manipulative script she'd been using all along. I didn't respond. Later, my aunt pulled me aside to share something that nearly made me laugh. Mom had called her earlier, begging her to pressure me into apologizing and buying the purse. My aunt shut it down immediately, telling her to stop the games and focus on the real meaning of the holidays. Knowing someone had my back in all of this made the day feel even lighter. As the evening wound down, a few extended family members reached out to me. They'd seen Mom's posts and wanted to let me know they supported me. Some even shared their own experiences of dealing with her manipulative behavior. It was eye-opening to realize just how many people had been affected by the same patterns. Before I left, my aunt surprised me with a small gift. It was a family heirloom, a delicate gold locket that had belonged to my grandmother. She told me it was her way of thanking me for standing up to the dysfunction and trying to break the cycle. It wasn't flashy or expensive, but it was deeply meaningful. That night, I spent some time reflecting on everything that had happened. Without the weight of trying to please everyone, the day had felt lighter, almost peaceful. It was a stark contrast to the chaos I'd grown used to. For the first time, I realized just how much energy I'd been wasting on trying to meet impossible expectations. Before the night was over, a cousin texted me with an interesting tidbit. Apparently, one of my siblings had been complaining that they didn't get any expensive gifts from Mom this year. The irony was almost too much. When I updated Reddit with the full story, the post went viral. Thousands of people shared their support and similar experiences. It was humbling and validating to see how many people resonated with my situation. Mom's final move came late that night. She left me a voicemail, tearfully saying she hoped I would come to my senses in the new year. It was dramatic, but it felt hollow. By then, her tactics had lost their power over me. As I turned off my phone, I made a promise to myself I would keep this boundary in place. No more guilt, no more manipulation. This was the start of a new chapter, and I wasn't going back. Update 5. The aftermath of the holiday drama carried into the new year, but the tone had shifted. Mom didn't invite me to her New Year's celebration, which I heard was another small gathering with my siblings. If this had been any other year, I might have been upset. This time, I was relieved. I spent New Year's Eve with a few friends, eating takeout and watching movies. It was simple, and for once, I wasn't carrying the weight of trying to please anyone. Not long after, one of my siblings reached out. Their tone was different, not accusatory, but desperate. They asked to borrow money, claiming they couldn't trust Mom anymore to help with rent. It was ironic, considering they'd sided with her throughout the holiday drama. I told them no. They didn't take it well, but I wasn't going to be their safety net anymore, especially when they'd tried to guilt-trip me just weeks earlier. Meanwhile, Mom ramped up her public campaign. She posted more passive-aggressive updates on Facebook, trying to paint herself as the victim. This time, though, the sympathy was waning. Extended family members who'd learned the full story stopped engaging with her posts. A few even started commenting directly, pointing out inconsistencies in her narrative. It was clear her usual tactics weren't working like they used to. Dad continued his quiet support from the sidelines. He'd text me sporadically, apologizing for not stepping in earlier but still avoiding any real confrontation with Mom. It was frustrating in some ways, but at least he wasn't actively adding to the drama. His texts usually ended with something like, "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself," which felt like a small win. Aunt, on the other hand, became a rock for me. She started hosting more family gatherings without Mom, creating a space where the extended family could reconnect without the usual tension. These gatherings felt different, lighter, easier. She also began subtly encouraging other family members to set boundaries with Mom, which led to an interesting shift. Some extended relatives began pulling back from Mom entirely. A cousin mentioned that they'd stopped inviting her to their events after seeing how she'd handled Christmas. It wasn't a mass exodus, but the ripple effect was noticeable. Mom had burned a lot of bridges, and people were starting to see her patterns for what they were. In therapy, I hit a milestone. I shared everything that had happened and felt a sense of progress I hadn't experienced before. For the first time, I didn't feel trapped by the guilt that had always kept me tethered to my family's expectations. My therapist pointed out how far I'd come, which made me realize how much lighter my life felt without constantly bending to their demands. Of course, Mom wasn't done. She made a dramatic post about being abandoned by her family, complete with an old photo of her holding me and my siblings as toddlers. It was the kind of post designed to pull at heartstrings, but this time it backfired. People called her out, some publicly and others in private messages. A cousin later told me they'd messaged her directly, asking why she couldn't just apologize and move forward. She didn't respond. The most surprising twist came from one of my siblings. They reached out privately and admitted they'd started to see how manipulative Mom could be. They didn't go as far as to apologize for their role in the holiday drama, but it was the first crack in the armor. It gave me hope that maybe things could change, even if it wouldn't happen overnight. On a personal level, things were looking up. I got a promotion at work, which felt like a fresh start. The timing couldn't have been better. It was as if the universe was rewarding me for finally taking control of my life. Without the constant stress of family drama, I had more energy to focus on my career and my own happiness. One of the best moments came in the form of a letter from the charity where I donated the gifts. They thanked me for the contributions and shared how the items had brought joy to families in need. I shared the letter with my aunt and a few cousins, who were touched by the gesture. It felt like the perfect way to close that chapter of the holiday saga. After the dramatic voicemail Mom left on Christmas night, she went silent for weeks. It wasn't like her, but I suspected it was more about embarrassment than anything else. She'd played her cards and lost, and now she didn't know how to regroup. For once, the silence didn't bother me. My final Reddit update went viral, with tens of thousands of upvotes and comments. People applauded the progress, the boundaries I'd set, and the lessons I'd learned. The support from strangers was overwhelming and humbling. Many shared their own similar experiences, turning the comment section into a space for mutual encouragement and solidarity. Aunt has already started planning a family trip for the summer, specifically inviting only those who contributed positively to the holiday. It's something to look forward to, a reminder that family doesn't have to mean chaos. As for me, I found a sense of peace I didn't think was possible. The weight of trying to manage everyone else's expectations is gone. This year taught me that boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to a healthier, happier life. And for the first time, I feel like I'm standing on solid ground. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and this whole thing started when my mom dropped what I can only call the rent bomb on me. I live in a city about 3 hours away from my hometown with my girlfriend Lila, who's 30. My mom and my younger sister Emily, who's 24, live together in the house we grew up in. For as long as I can remember, my mom has always had a soft spot for Emily. It's not a secret, Emily knows it, I know it. And honestly, anyone who spent 5 minutes with us can see it. But what happened recently took things to a whole new level. A couple of weeks ago, my mom called to talk about Thanksgiving plans. It started off normal enough. She asked how things were going and whether I'd be coming home for the holiday. That's when she casually mentioned this new rule she's implemented. She said that from now on, any family member staying at her house overnight would need to pay $200 per night. She framed it like it was no big deal, something she was doing to be fair. I was so stunned I didn't even know how to respond right away. Let me be clear, Emily doesn't pay rent. She's lived in that house rent-free since she finished college, and Mom still helps her out financially. Emily has a decent job, but she's not exactly paying her own way. Mom covers groceries, utilities, and who knows what else. Meanwhile, I've been financially independent since I was 18. I don't expect handouts, but the idea of being charged to stay in my childhood home while Emily lives there rent-free just didn't sit right with me. When I finally asked Mom about it, she gave me this rehearsed-sounding explanation about how it's only fair because I don't contribute to the household like Emily does. She kept repeating that Emily is there full-time and helps with things around the house, while I only visit occasionally. The way she said it, you'd think Emily was single-handedly keeping the house from falling apart. I pointed out that Emily doesn't pay for anything, and she brushed it off like it was irrelevant. It was obvious she didn't see an issue. I wish I could say this kind of favoritism was new, but it's not. Growing up, Emily always got the better deal. When I got my first job at 16, Mom said it was time for me to start saving for college and made me cover my own expenses. Emily, on the other hand, got to keep all the money from her part-time job for fun stuff. If I wanted to do anything outside the house, I had to save up or find a way to make it happen. Emily always had Mom's wallet as a safety net. After that call, I was livid. I told Lila what happened, and she was just as shocked as I was. Lila has always been great about helping me navigate my family dynamics, but even she couldn't believe my mom was serious. Her advice was simple. I needed to stand my ground and not let my mom guilt me into going along with this ridiculous rule. The next time I called my mom, I tried to talk it through. I explained how unfair it felt to be charged while Emily got a free ride. Mom just doubled down, saying the rule wasn't about Emily, it was about me. She said I should be grateful she was even letting me stay there at all, and that $200 a night was standard if I stayed at a hotel. That's when it hit me she wasn't backing down. In her mind, this rule made sense, and no amount of logic was going to change that. My dad is still in the picture, but he's always been the kind of guy who avoids conflict. When I brought it up to him, he shrugged and said something about how it's her house, her rules. He didn't agree with her, but he wasn't going to stand up to her either. That was no surprise. Growing up, Dad never got involved when it came to issues between Mom and us kids. Emily, of course, wasn't much help. When I mentioned the rent rule to her, she laughed and said something about how Mom's always been like this. She didn't even pretend to see my side of things. It was like she thought the whole situation was funny. That's always been Emily's go-to move: dismiss and deflect. She doesn't need to fight her battles when Mom's already doing it for her. As Thanksgiving got closer, the tension kept building. I knew I couldn't just let this slide, but I wasn't sure how to handle it. Should I suck it up and pay the $200 to avoid drama, or should I take a stand and risk blowing up the holiday? It felt like no matter what I chose, someone was going to be upset. I spent a lot of time thinking about the bigger picture. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the blatant favoritism that's been happening for years. Lila helped me see that this could be an opportunity to finally set some boundaries with my mom, even if it wasn't easy. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't keep letting this dynamic control my life. By the end of that week, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to pay $200 to stay in my own mother's house, but I also wasn't ready to confront her about it just yet. Instead, I decided to wait and see how things played out. For now, I was focused on figuring out how to handle this without letting it ruin my holiday or my relationship with my mom. Update 1. So Thanksgiving was just around the corner, and it was time to address the situation head on. I wasn't about to pay $200 a night to stay at my mom's house, especially considering how Emily lived there rent-free. I decided to call my mom and explain that I wouldn't be coming for the holiday under those conditions. When I told her, the conversation didn't go the way I expected. She immediately accused me of being petty and not valuing family. She said it was ridiculous that I couldn't see how necessary the rent rule was, and that I was letting something so small destroy our relationship. It didn't matter that I was explaining the obvious unfairness. She was sticking to her stance, as if this was just a normal, reasonable thing for her to do. I wasn't backing down. I calmly told her that I wasn't willing to visit if I had to pay for a place that was supposed to be home. I reminded her of the years of favoritism, how Emily had always gotten the free ride while I was expected to be self-sufficient. I told her this wasn't about money, it was about respect. That was the last straw for me. If she couldn't even respect me enough to treat me fairly, I wasn't going to play along. After hanging up, I figured that was the end of it, but things escalated quickly. Later that evening, my dad called me. He wasn't angry or defensive, but he tried to mediate. He asked me to reconsider for the sake of peace, told me that Thanksgiving wasn't the time for a fight. He tried to appeal to my sense of family, but I could tell he wasn't really on my side either. He was just trying to keep the peace, because that's what he always does. I told him the decision was made and I wasn't changing my mind. Then, of course, Emily texted me. She made it clear that she thought I was overreacting. She said I was being selfish for missing out on family time just because of some small issue. She couldn't have been more dismissive. Emily has always had this ability to pretend nothing's wrong, even when it's glaringly obvious. She made it sound like I was the problem for standing up for myself. Her message left me even more convinced that this wasn't just about the rent, it was about the years of being overlooked and dismissed. I stuck to my decision. I wasn't going to let my mom guilt me into coming back, and I wasn't going to apologize for wanting fairness. As the holiday came closer, I prepared myself to spend Thanksgiving elsewhere. Lila, my girlfriend, was fully supportive. She understood exactly where I was coming from, and we decided to spend the day with her family instead. Their gathering was warm, welcoming, and stress-free, exactly what I needed after everything that had happened. Meanwhile, my mom started sending a series of texts. Every message felt like a guilt trip, trying to make me feel bad for not coming home. She sent the usual lines about how family is everything and how I was breaking her heart by not showing up. I ignored the messages at first, but then I heard through the grapevine that she was telling extended family that I had abandoned them for the holidays. The narrative was spinning out of control, and I was starting to feel the weight of the public pressure. By the time Thanksgiving came and went, the fallout was in full swing. Some of my aunts, uncles, and cousins reached out to me. Some sided with me, agreeing that the rent rule was unfair and that I had a right to set boundaries. But others, including some relatives I thought I was close with, started shaming me for not going to Thanksgiving. They echoed my mom's argument that I was being unreasonable. One cousin even called me spoiled for not understanding the situation. Lila kept reminding me to stay focused on what mattered: respect. She was right, of course, but it was hard not to feel the weight of everyone's judgment. Still, I knew I had made the right choice. This wasn't just about the holidays, it was about making sure my boundaries were respected. Things didn't stop there. The tension continued to build when Emily posted a family photo on social media. The picture showed everyone from Thanksgiving with the caption "Family is everything," but there was one glaring omission: me. It felt like a punch in the gut. Emily had gone out of her way to make sure I wasn't included, and her post reeked of passive aggressiveness. I took a screenshot and kept scrolling. The comment section of Emily's post didn't help either. There were thinly veiled jabs aimed at me, from family members calling me out of touch to others suggesting that I was being overly dramatic. It was hard not to feel like I was the villain in this entire situation, even though I knew I wasn't. At this point, I felt like I had to get some external perspective on the whole thing. So I went to Reddit and posted an update about what had happened. I shared everything: how my mom had made the rent rule, how Emily was getting financial support while I was being charged, and how the whole thing was falling apart. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people commented, agreeing that what my mom was doing was unfair, and many shared their own experiences with similar family dynamics. The support was incredibly validating. It was like a weight had been lifted. In the comments, someone suggested I take a break from my mom and focus on my own happiness for a while. That idea stuck with me. I'd been so caught up in trying to make things work with my family that I hadn't stopped to think about what I really wanted. So, I made a decision. I would take a step back from my mom, from the guilt trips, and from the drama. It was time to focus on myself. Not long after Thanksgiving, I got a call from a family friend who lives in my hometown. She mentioned something that stopped me in my tracks. My mom had recently helped Emily pay off a significant chunk of debt. It wasn't just a small loan either. She'd covered thousands of dollars. Hearing that was like getting hit with a brick. This was the same mom who told me she couldn't help with my college tuition because it's important to learn responsibility. The more I thought about it, the more it started to connect. Emily had always seemed to land on her feet, despite making questionable financial decisions. Growing up, I was the one working part-time jobs and saving up while Emily always had the latest gadgets or clothes, courtesy of mom. When I asked for help with school expenses, I got a lecture about independence. Emily, though, she got handouts and praise for the smallest achievements. It wasn't new, but finding out about this debt payoff felt like a new level of unfairness. I told Lila about what I'd learned, and she encouraged me to dig deeper. She pointed out that if my mom was this open about covering Emily's debt, there were probably other financial perks I didn't know about. I hesitated at first. Snooping isn't my thing. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed to understand just how deep this favoritism went. A few days later, during a call with my aunt, the topic came up. My aunt confirmed what I suspected. Emily wasn't just living rent-free. She wasn't paying for groceries or utilities either. Mom was covering everything. When I asked why, my aunt shrugged and said, "Your mom thinks Emily has it harder than you." That comment stuck with me. Harder? Emily had all the support in the world, while I'd been fending for myself for years. It was hard not to let my frustration boil over, so I decided to confront my mom directly. I called her and brought up the debt payoff, the rent-free living, and the grocery situation. She didn't deny any of it. Instead, she brushed it off, saying Emily needed more help because she wasn't as financially stable as me. She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, as if helping one child to the detriment of the other was perfectly reasonable. When I pushed back, she hit me with a line I'd heard too many times before. "You've always been the strong one. Emily isn't." It wasn't surprising, but it still stung. My dad, predictably, tried to step in and smooth things over. He told me to let it go and reminded me that family is complicated. But that's all he ever did, stand on the sidelines and try to keep the peace without actually addressing the problem. His unwillingness to take a stand only made things worse. The fallout from this new revelation started spreading through the family. A few relatives reached out to me, some supporting me and others taking my mom's side. One cousin told me that my mom was only doing what any good parent would do by helping the child who needed it most. Another relative, though, admitted they'd noticed the favoritism for years and were surprised I hadn't cut ties sooner. The divide in the family was becoming more obvious, and it felt like everyone was taking sides. Emily, of course, had her own take on things. When I brought it up to her, she dismissed my concerns entirely. She claimed that mom was just trying to help her get ahead and that I was being dramatic. She acted like it wasn't a big deal, even though it was clear she'd been benefiting from this dynamic her whole life. Her nonchalant attitude only made things worse. It was like she couldn't, or wouldn't, acknowledge how unfair it all was. By this point, I'd had enough. The rent rule, the debt payoff, the constant excuses, it was too much. I decided to go no contact with my mom, at least temporarily. I told her I needed space and wouldn't be engaging with her until she could treat me fairly. She didn't take it well. I got more guilt-laden messages, more accusations of being ungrateful, and even a few subtle jabs about how I was tearing the family apart. It was exhausting, but I knew I couldn't keep putting myself through this. Lila helped me stay grounded. She reminded me that it was okay to set boundaries, even if it felt uncomfortable. With her encouragement, I started therapy to process everything. In those first few sessions, I began unpacking years of frustration and neglect. It was eye-opening to realize just how much of my self-worth had been tied to seeking approval from my mom, a person who would never give it equally. I shared another update on Reddit, explaining everything I'd discovered. The responses poured in. People shared their own stories of favoritism and encouraged me to prioritize my mental health. Some offered advice on how to maintain boundaries, while others simply validated my experiences. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. After a lot of reflection, I made a decision. I was done seeking my mom's approval. I was done hoping she'd treat me the same as Emily. From now on, I would fully separate my financial and emotional well-being from my family. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my own life. Update 3. After weeks of silence, I got a surprising call from my aunt. She's the peacemaker of the family, always trying to smooth things over when conflicts arise. She said she wanted to organize a family meeting to sort out the misunderstandings between my mom, Emily, and me. At first, I was hesitant. These meetings rarely solve anything, and I didn't see how this one would be any different. But my aunt insisted, saying it would give me a chance to explain my side of the story. After a lot of back and forth, I agreed to go. Lila, of course, was skeptical but supportive. She reminded me to stand firm and not let the guilt trips get to me. The meeting was set for the following weekend at my aunt's house. When I walked in, the atmosphere was tense. My mom and Emily were already there, sitting together on one side of the living room. My dad was off to the side, looking uncomfortable as usual. A few other family members had shown up too, likely out of curiosity rather than any real desire to mediate. My aunt kicked things off by saying she wanted everyone to speak openly and respectfully. That lasted all of 5 minutes before things started to unravel. My mom launched into a monologue about how she's always tried to be a fair parent and how the rent rule was her way of ensuring everyone contributed equally. She painted herself as the victim, saying she was hurt that I'd cut ties over something so trivial. I waited until she was finished before calmly pointing out the obvious. Emily wasn't being asked to contribute equally. I laid out everything: the rent rule, the debt payoff, the fact that Emily wasn't paying for groceries or utilities. I explained that this wasn't a one-time issue but part of a long history of unfair treatment. I wasn't angry or defensive, I just stated the facts. Emily, of course, couldn't let that go. She jumped in, saying she deserved the extra help because she's closer to mom and has always been there for her. She even implied that my decision to move out years ago was proof that I didn't care about the family as much as she did. It was the same old narrative: Emily as the devoted daughter, me as the independent one who was somehow selfish for not needing constant support. The room got quiet for a moment before my dad finally spoke up. For the first time, he admitted he didn't agree with the rent rule and thought it was unfair. He said he'd kept quiet because he didn't want to upset my mom, but it was clear he didn't fully support her decisions. It was a small victory, but it didn't change much. My mom brushed off his comment, saying she was the one managing the household and that he didn't understand the bigger picture. As the discussion continued, it became clear that the family was divided. Some relatives, like my aunt, started questioning my mom's behavior. They pointed out that the rent rule seemed unnecessary and that helping one child at the expense of the other wasn't fair. Others, however, sided with my mom, saying she had the right to set rules for her house and that I was being too rigid. The lines were drawn, and it was clear this wasn't going to be resolved anytime soon. At one point, my mom's facade cracked. She seemed genuinely regretful, saying she didn't want to lose her relationship with me. But the moment didn't last. She quickly reverted to her defensive stance, insisting that everything she'd done was for the good of the family. By the end of the meeting, I reiterated my boundaries. I made it clear that I wasn't going to visit as long as the rent rule was in place. My mom didn't respond, and the meeting ended without any real resolution. On the drive home, Lila pointed out how unhealthy the family dynamics were. She said it was obvious that my mom and Emily thrived on this system of favoritism and that breaking away from it was the best thing I could do. In therapy, I started to unpack more of the patterns I'd noticed during the meeting. My therapist helped me see how my mom's behavior wasn't just about favoritism, it was a form of control. By keeping Emily dependent and pushing me away, she was maintaining a dynamic that allowed her to feel needed and in charge. Meanwhile, the Reddit thread I'd posted about the situation was still gaining traction. More people shared their stories of dealing with similar family issues, and their advice and encouragement were a huge source of comfort. It felt good to know I wasn't alone in this. After the meeting, my mom stopped reaching out altogether. The silence was both a relief and a source of conflict. Part of me wanted her to acknowledge her mistakes, but another part of me knew that was unlikely. Emily, on the other hand, kept the drama alive. She posted cryptic comments on social media about family loyalty and how some people only care about themselves. It was obviously directed at me, but I ignored it. The turning point came when I realized I didn't need my mom's validation anymore. I'd spent years trying to earn her approval, but it was never going to happen. With Lila's support and the progress I was making in therapy, I decided to focus on building a life that made me happy. The family drama would always be there, but it didn't have to define me. Update 4. The silence from my mom stretched on for weeks after the family meeting. I thought she might have finally given up, but it turns out she'd just shifted her strategy. Instead of reaching out directly, she used Emily as her go-between. Emily called me one evening, acting like she was trying to mediate, but it didn't take long for her real intentions to come out. She accused me of tearing the family apart and insisted that I was overreacting to what she called a minor issue. It was the same dismissive attitude she always had, but this time she threw in a few guilt-tripping lines that were clearly rehearsed. Emily's involvement didn't stop there. She started escalating the situation by messaging me about how I was being selfish and how mom was heartbroken. It was all part of the same pattern: mom using Emily to apply pressure while staying in the background herself. I ignored most of it, but then I got a call from a cousin that made my blood boil. My cousin let it slip that my mom was planning to sell some family heirlooms. These weren't just any items, they were things with deep sentimental value, like my grandfather's old pocket watch, which he'd left to our family when he passed. I asked if there had been any discussion about it, and of course there hadn't. Mom had already promised Emily the proceeds from the sale. It felt like yet another slap in the face. Not only was she dismissing my connection to these items, but she was also using them to funnel more financial support to Emily. I couldn't let that go. I called my mom to confront her about the heirlooms. The conversation quickly turned into a heated argument. She didn't deny anything. She said she was selling the items because they were just collecting dust and Emily needed the money more than I did. When I brought up the sentimental value, she waved it off, saying I didn't even live nearby to appreciate them. She went on to justify her actions by claiming Emily deserved more because she planned to stay close and take care of her in her old age. It was clear she saw this as a transaction. Emily's loyalty bought and paid for with family treasures. Later, my dad called me privately to apologize. He admitted he didn't agree with what mom was doing, but said he felt powerless to change her mind. It was the same thing I'd heard a dozen times before, and honestly, it didn't make much of a difference. His passivity had allowed this dynamic to continue for years, and now it was too far gone. Frustrated, I turned back to Reddit and shared an update about the heirlooms. The post blew up, gaining traction on our best of Redditor updates and sparking a huge discussion about family favoritism and entitlement. People were outraged on my behalf, and many shared their own experiences with similar situations. It was validating to see so many people agree that my mom's behavior was unfair, but it also made me realize just how common this kind of dysfunction is. Lila, as always, had my back. She suggested we start creating our own family traditions, ones that didn't involve my mom's manipulations. It was a small idea, but it made a big difference. We started brainstorming ways to make the holidays special without the usual drama, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could look forward to the season. During one of my therapy sessions, I brought up the heirloom issue. My therapist helped me connect the dots between my mom's actions and the larger pattern of undervaluing me. It wasn't just about the items, it was about how she consistently prioritized Emily, financially and emotionally, while expecting me to fend for myself. Identifying that pattern gave me more clarity about what I needed to do next. Meanwhile, my mom wasn't done. She called a family meeting, without inviting me, and announced that Emily would inherit the family house. She told everyone it was because Emily was the only one who truly loves me. An uncle who'd been quietly supportive of me finally spoke up, calling out her blatant favoritism. That only made things worse. The family was now fully divided, with some relatives siding with me and others doubling down on my mom's narrative. Emily, of course, took the opportunity to stir the pot. She started spreading rumors that I'd always been jealous of her relationship with mom. I heard about it through mutual family members, who told me Emily was painting herself as the dutiful daughter while casting me as the villain. It was textbook Emily, playing the victim while throwing me under the bus. By this point, I'd had enough. In my next therapy session, I came to a realization: this pattern wasn't going to change unless I enforced firm boundaries. I couldn't keep engaging in these toxic dynamics and expecting a different outcome. With that in mind, I sent my mom a final message. I told her I wouldn't be engaging with her anymore unless the rent rule was eliminated and the favoritism stopped. It was a clear line in the sand, and I knew she wouldn't like it, but it was the only way forward. Update 5. After drawing my line in the sand, I officially went low contact with my mom. I told her I wouldn't be engaging further unless the rent rule and the blatant favoritism ended. From that point forward, I only communicated with her through text, and only if it was an emergency. Predictably, she didn't take it well. She sent a dramatic message accusing me of abandoning the family and ruining her life. It was filled with over-the-top statements about how she did everything for me and how ungrateful I was. I didn't respond. Emily, never one to miss an opportunity to stir the pot, ramped up her social media campaign. She posted about how she couldn't believe her brother would treat their mom so poorly. Her captions were loaded with passive-aggressive jabs, and her comment section became a breeding ground for relatives and friends to weigh in. Some people sided with her, calling me selfish, while others stayed quiet. I ignored it all. It was the same old routine, Emily playing the victim and using social media to get sympathy. Surprisingly, a few family members started reaching out to me privately. An aunt sent me a heartfelt message saying she'd noticed the favoritism for years and had always felt bad about how I was treated. Another cousin admitted they'd been uncomfortable with how my mom favored Emily but didn't know how to bring it up. Their messages were small but meaningful. It was good to know that some people saw the truth, even if they weren't vocal about it. With the holidays approaching, Lila and I decided to take a big step. We hosted our first holiday dinner, inviting close friends and supportive family members. We made it clear that it was a drama-free zone, and the result was incredible. Everyone brought a dish, the atmosphere was warm and relaxed, and for the first time in years, I actually enjoyed the holidays. It felt like a fresh start, like I was finally building the kind of family traditions I'd always wanted. Meanwhile, things were shifting on my mom's side too. A cousin filled me in on some family gossip. Emily was struggling financially. Apparently, the stress of the family drama was starting to wear on my mom, and she'd begun pulling back some of the financial support she'd been giving Emily. It wasn't a complete cutoff, but it was enough to make Emily feel the pressure. She'd stopped posting her usual cryptic comments about me online and was keeping a much lower profile. A few months later, out of nowhere, I got a call from my mom. It was the first time she'd reached out directly since our falling out. Her tone was different, calmer, almost regretful. She asked if we could meet to talk things through. I agreed, but made it clear that I wasn't budging on my boundaries. If she wanted a relationship with me, it would have to be on equal terms. We met at a neutral spot, a small cafe halfway between my place and hers. She started by offering what I can only describe as a half apology. She said she never meant to hurt me and that she just wanted things to be fair. It wasn't the full acknowledgement I'd hoped for, but it was something. I stayed calm and reiterated my stance. The rent rule and the favoritism had to stop if she wanted me to be part of her life. She didn't argue, but she also didn't fully commit to change. It felt like she was testing the waters, trying to gauge how much she needed to concede to keep me in her life. I left the meeting feeling cautiously optimistic, but prepared for the possibility that nothing would change. My dad, true to form, reached out privately after the meeting. He said he regretted not standing up for me more over the years and wished he'd handled things differently. It was a bittersweet moment. While his words meant something, his inaction had allowed this dynamic to persist for so long that it was hard to feel fully reconciled. As for Emily, she'd gone almost radio silent. Her social media posts had shifted from family loyalty jabs to more generic content, and she wasn't engaging in the same drama she had before. It seemed like her struggles were forcing her to focus inward for once. Now, I'm in a place where I feel free. Lila and I have built a life that's completely separate from the toxicity of my mom's favoritism. Therapy has been a huge help, giving me the tools to let go of the need for my mom's approval. Instead, I've found fulfillment in the relationships that truly matter. I posted a final update on Reddit, thanking everyone for their support and sharing the progress I've made. The response was overwhelming. People who'd followed my story from the beginning chimed in with congratulations and shared how my journey had inspired them to set boundaries in their own lives. It was a full circle moment, knowing that my story had helped others the way their advice had helped me.